All right. Oh, it's letting me know. All right. So today we're going to venture into a new place. We're going out of Acts into Romans, which is pretty cool considering we were in Acts a long time. My hope is that as we go through Romans, we start to see some of the connections between Romans and Acts because they do play on each other quite a bit. So it's important that we kind of make those connections and remember the things that we learned in Acts because many of the themes will pop up again in Romans. And so as I started to look at this and I realized that I actually get to kick this off, I remembered, I don't know if all of you remember if you were there, but I got to kick Acts off as well. And so one of the things I talked about when we were talking about Acts that is still true in Romans is that you have to remember that what we are doing right now is starting a new movie, but it's a part of a sequel. So for those of you who like sequels, this will fit right in. And a sequel simply means that there's movie one and then there's movie two. I'm a Star Wars fan, and so when you look at Star Wars, it really wasn't the first movie. It was the first movie, but it wasn't the first book of that whole sequel. So you picked it up, and I think it was 3, or by now they've got it to 6, I believe. It was the 6th movie in what used to be a trilogy. And so we have some things happening here that are very similar because this is a second portion by a specific writer. And it's more along the lines of his journey. So let's pick this up and let's see what we know. First. First of all, does anybody have any prior understandings of the book of Romans and kind of what it does? Anybody have any thoughts about the book of Romans, what you've been told about it, how you feel about the book of Romans, etc.?
I think it's in the setting is in Corinth, maybe. That's all I think.
Any other thoughts? We're going to touch that, Miss Nita. That is absolutely the case.
We know it's a continuation of Paul's letters.
What do you mean by Paul's letters?
Well, a lot of what he wrote was letters to the different churches because for most of the time he was in prison. So he didn't always have the opportunity to go and visit the churches personally. So he wrote letters. Now, in this case, though, this starts off with him actually being there. Am I right?
Being where?
You're asking too many questions.
See?
Oh, no, he's not there yet. He's not there yet because he's in Rome. That's right. He's not there. So this is continuation of him writing letters. I stick with my first answer. Anybody feel free to help me.
Hey, guys, everybody can smile because now you know that she knows what it feels like when she's teaching. Anything else you think about Romans? About letters, I mean, why letters? Because we're going to dig into this concept of letters a little bit. Let me see if I can make it move. Sometimes it will move. Sometimes it won't. All right. So let's talk about a letter for a moment. Now, we all learned, I know I did a long time ago about letters. So what is a proper letter format? What do you think that should look like? What are the pieces to a good letter? Any thoughts?
Address your audience or your person. So 2.
I'm doing something different than I normally do. I am actually writing as you talk because I want to make sure I touch each of the audience. And welcome, Norman.
Glad to be here.
A greeting.
This Paul with an introduction.
Good.
And of course, a conclusion.
All right.
All right, James, I used to say in your introduction, tell them what you want to say, and the body, tell them what you want to say, and then at the end, sum up what you said.
And that is, and Aaron, I am so glad you did that because that is exactly what we were taught in English, right? It was tell them what you're going to say, tell them what you're saying, and then tell them what you told them. And that was really what we were taught in English format when writing a letter. The problem with that is we have to take into account the time frame in which letters were written. So today, if you were writing a letter, if you talk to young students, they would tell you something very different about writing a letter. It sounds like it should be the same. Oh, we're going to always write a letter the same. Well, 30 years ago, we didn't have a sublanguage called texting, right? 30 years ago, we didn't have the degree of slang that we currently have in multiple different cultures within different communities around the country and around the world. 30 years ago, we were looking at something that was vastly different than what we're looking at today. And so while some of us may be able to identify a good letter based on 30 years ago, most of us would struggle if we looked at it today and saw what English teachers are actually teaching students about writing a letter. In fact, students don't even get into writing a letter until they're juniors in high school because it's considered primitive. Most people do some sort of video or email or Instagram. They use some other format to actually speak to people. So the concept of a letter today is vastly different than a letter 50 years ago, 30 years ago. Now take that a step further and recognize that a letter 30 years ago is different than a letter 1900 years prior, okay? So we have to take those things into account when we start to read these letters. Because when you start to try to tell me that Romans is one letter, I'm looking at you like you have lost your mind. That thing is 100 pages, 175 pages. That can't be one letter. Who's gonna read that? My wife always says to me when I'm looking at stuff, she'll say, you're too wordy. You got too many words on the page. There's too much. You need to get that down succinct and get it small so that it's not, because nobody's gonna read all that, okay? And so if you can imagine a letter today, you know, what Paul's letter would look like today, it might look dramatically different based on the way we live and the way we talk and the way we express ourselves. And I certainly think the mode of the delivery of the letter would change. I don't think it would necessarily be pen and paper. It might be computer, it might be audio, it could be a lot of different things. It could be PowerPoints, it could be anything, right? It's a different world that we live in. So when we look at what is the proper format of a letter, I have to take us back some 2,000 years, okay? So that's what we're gonna do for just a moment. And you're gonna see that it's very similar. The first thing in a letter during this time would be the concept of an opening. And an opening would be a way for us to start to get to know and greet each other. Now, that opening would depend primarily upon the relationship I have with you prior to the letter being written, right? So if I know you, my opening looks different than if I don't know you, okay? And so keep that in mind. The second part of a letter is the body. Now, let me back up just for a second. Opening has several parts in it as well. And we're going to talk about those in just a few moments. Because today what we're dealing with in Romans 1:1-17 is the opening, okay? But the opening has different parts, and those parts include a salutation. Well, we'll get into those. And so that's the opening, okay? The body, much of what you see in Romans, the whole middle part, the wordy part, is this body, which is really telling a narrative. It's pretending like, and it's not pretending. You have to remember, Christy, you hit this earlier. There was no get in your plane and go to Rome, spend the day, talk, and go back home. These trips were long trips. So you have to understand that when they wrote letters, they had to figure out stuff about each other through the letters. And so those letters were very long and wordy because you couldn't assume anybody knew anything, okay? So this body is the big part of this letter, and there's lots of parts to the body. I won't go into those at all today, but there are lots of parts to the body, different themes, different points he's trying to make. All of them should be outlined in the opening, okay? So the body is dependent upon the opening. And then the last part is this closing, right? It's this conclusion of sorts. It's this wrapping it up in a bow and then giving it, and so that you can restate, to Aaron, your point, restate what you stated. And so that is a very different than what we would do today, in that it is wordy. It literally recounts every point that you made in your body. That was how they communicated. So therefore, letters that we see in the Bible, which are a lot of them, I think there's 21 out of the 27 portions of the New Testament are letters. You can see just how wordy they were, but how encompassing in thought they were as well. You can see all that. All right. So, but for today's purposes, we're going to be touching on the opening. So what are your thoughts about an opening? And I heard some of this already. So what are some of your thoughts about what is in a good opening or a proper opening?
Can you repeat the question again, please?
What is a proper opening for a letter in your mind? And you said some of these. I cheated.
How you greet the person.
Yep. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think specifically identifying your target by your greeting, but then kind of opening up with the reason why I'm writing, kind of give them a advance notice of just a quick, I'm writing this because of such and such, like I guess Paul and Romans was talking about. He talked to you, and then I'm gonna go into sinning and how to counter those sins and stuff like that.
Often begins with dear person's name. Once again,
somebody audio in the background.
That's yeah. I'm
not sure about the person's title or gender, then just use their first name.
And Miss Kitty, can you please mute?
Oh my goodness.
James, I think the other thing that is a part of the opening is who you are.
Ooh. Say more.
So you need to introduce yourself.
Why?
Because otherwise I'm not going to continue reading.
And I want you to realize that these letters are just that. They are interpersonal communication, sometimes with an individual, sometimes with a group of individuals. And we're going to touch on all this a little bit here in just a little bit. So from a technical perspective only, a good opening will have a salutation.
And Sister Demetrakis gave a good point, because in today's age, people don't really check the source of the information they're getting. So there's so many things flying around on social media, and people are quick to share it or, speak on it and side with this particular issue or stance, not really knowing the source. That's why I always ask people, I'm like, who's the source? It's funny, I have a couple lawyer buddies, they kind of teach me that. They always like, what's the source? Because you can't just accept everybody's word. And that's what Paul was basically, like she said, he has to be able to tell people why he's able to share this information. You can't just hear from anybody.
Amen. And I think what's really important about what you just said is being able to identify reputable sources, right? For one, and I know I might make some people mad here, Wikipedia is junk. Never, ever, ever take Wikipedia as fact. It is not. It's not, because anybody can go in and change a definition, change a word. Anybody can do it. I can go in and change the definition of a word, and until somebody changes it back, it's going to be what I put in it, right? And so in academia, one of the things we talk about is we typically only trust those things that are edu. So when you look them up online, if you're looking up an online text, it has to have edu on the end of it, so that we know that it's been found solid and viable and valuable by the educational community, meaning it's been researched, and even some of that isn't good information. So figuring out who the writers are important, and it's particularly important at the time that this was written, because there was no Wikipedia, there was no anything. All you had was this letter, and in fact, there were no periodicals. There was no way to go research anything except to go to the church and read any of the materials that they listed. Typically, churches were, at this time period, they were also the keepers of academics, all writings. And so that's why you'll hear sometimes about lost scrolls and all those things. Those things happen when churches burned down, or there was a disaster, and the writings were trapped in the church or in the archive attached to the church, and we lost those things. But I digress. So when we take a look at a proper opening for a letter, the first thing we're going to see, and it doesn't like me now. All right, is a salutation / greeting, something to make you feel good about the person who is sending the letter. Some information that makes them look or make you feel comfortable. They're trying to make sure you're comfortable with them. The next one is this Thanksgiving, right? This idea of let's feel good about each other. Let's talk about the rewards of whatever it is we're doing. It's a giving thanks in the middle of it. You're going to see this as we read through this. And then there becomes this statement or statements, could be plural, of the letter's theme. Should be an S in there. Letter's theme. And there could be multiple themes. And we're going to see this in this particular piece, okay? I'm going to move. Oops, wrong way. Okay. Oh, wait. All right. So what's the most important thing to remember when writing a letter? Because you've got these formats. It's pretty straightforward. If I can get it to work. And you said this earlier, Norman. Just remember your audience. Who am I talking to? Am I talking to one individual or a group of individuals? And each of those situations will dictate what the rest of my body looks like. Why is it important? So it isn't prudent to just pen a letter to a group of people, writing to and pretending like you're writing to an individual. You can't write every letter the same. Your message is misconstrued. The more eyes that see it, the more likely they are to nitpick ideas and concepts. And so you've got to be much more succinct or specific about what it is you're talking about, so that you can take away the doubt of all the people who are reading the letter. Or if it's just one, you can specify it to their biases, their ideas that you know about them, if you know them, right? You may not. But the most important portion of all of this is knowing your audience, okay? So let's jump to the facts of the piece that we're about to do. Pretty straightforward. We talked about it a little earlier. This letter was written, it was after the third missionary journey that Paul was on. It was written by Paul, and it was written to the believers in Rome who were both Jews and Gentiles. This becomes really important because Rome, and we often hear the words the Roman Catholic Church, okay? That is because this is the space when we start to see the combination of Jews and Gentiles in the same place. And part of Paul's belief and hope is that he can get both Jews and Gentiles to agree on some doctrine. And he needs to make sure that they get some synergy together. Otherwise, they're going to have factions and they're going to break up. And so he knows that he's writing to the believers in Rome who are both Jews and Gentiles. And someone said it earlier, the letter was written while Paul was in Corinth in preparation for his journey to Rome. That's going to be really important because this next piece, okay? The major themes of this particular letter. First, and I know this always makes us a little hairy, you know, we hate to talk about money in church. But look, ladies and gentlemen, it takes money to do missions. You have to eat. You have to have places to stay. You participate in services that you want to give to monetarily. I remember when I was first starting out in ministry and I was under I call it my spiritual father, and he would always keep in his wallet $100 bill. And he wouldn't spend the $100 bill. He would only have it so that when he went to a church, he would sew in $100 into that church if he was if something was going on. Always, that's all he carried it. He also said as a kid, he wanted to be able to do that. And so that was one of his dreams, was to be able to have $100 to be able to give to somebody. So it takes money to go do those things, especially when ministries are run by people who don't do regular lay jobs. By now, Paul is not doing a regular lay job. He is traveling all over the world preaching the gospel. He's not working in a specific place. So the first part of this is, one of the themes in here is to try to make sure that he gets support from a money perspective and a logistics, because and we're going to talk about this in a moment. Remember, his trip is actually to go to Spain, not Rome. He wants to go to Spain, and I'm going to show you this in just a moment. And then 2, he wanted to teach the fundamental doctrine of salvation in Spain through the Romans. He needed to make sure that they understood that process of salvation, right? And for the Jews, that meant that he had to show them that he was going to fulfill all the Old Testament promises. For the Gentiles, he had to make sure they knew that they were equal partners in Christianity. So he had two messages in Rome that he was trying to appease. He needed to also explain that there were people in Israel who did not believe in Christ. And he had to show how God dealt with that unbelief, because the people who didn't believe in Rome were going to be able to tie their unbelief to the unbelief that's happening in Israel. And he needed to clarify, look, ladies and gentlemen, this is what God does with unbelief. And then he had to do the most important piece to me, and that was give practical instructions on how Christians should live from a day to day. So what should it look like? Now here, guys, we got to remember something here. That doesn't necessarily look the same way today as it did then. I know this is uncomfortable because we pick up the Bible and it tells us how to live. It does. But it also has to be understood what they were saying at that time, because if you're not careful, you'll pick up something, read it, not understand that it doesn't mean what it means today, and you'll run off with your head high, your guns loaded, ready to go do what it is you do, because the Bible said, and you have a bit more read what it actually means than a man on the moon. And then you'll wonder why you're in trouble. You've got to read it, and you've got to understand what was happening. And so he's trying to give us some practical stuff, but please, please make sure that we read it for understanding and intent, okay? Because some of the customs, some of the ideas of that day are very different. And it doesn't make our ways right or wrong or their ways right or wrong. We just need to understand it before we move. All right, so we've kind of done the preliminary. Here's what's going on in this thing. Let's see if I can make this move. Any questions so far? Any thoughts? All right. So here's the piece I just wanted to show you really quickly. What Paul was doing was he was in Corinth. He was writing to Rome. And I think it was Persia, one of the young ladies, was getting ready to go to Rome from Corinth. And so he wrote this letter and gave it to her, and she took it to Rome. Now, you got to remember, again, there is no letter carrier service where it got there the next day. So things could happen between the time he wrote the letter and the time it arrived. And we'll get into the rest of it in a moment, but that's, remember the timing. So what Paul really wanted to do was go to Rome, he wanted to come from Rome. Oops, this is not working like I want it to. Maybe it'll let me. But he wanted to come from Rome.
What do you think about calls on a hand?
I think I hear Aaron. You want to go from Rome over to Spain, and he wanted to travel around Spain and then go back to Rome, okay? We don't know the exact path he took because it wasn't documented as well. Luke didn't go with him, as you can see. Thus, it was not a part of Acts. And that was because this piece, part of this isn't complete. These are some of the lost books that we talk about. So that was his plan, okay? So now let's jump into this. And I'm going to move really quickly here, guys. So Romans 1:1-5. Paul, a servant of Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle and set apart for the gospel of God. The gospel he promised beforehand through his prophet in the Holy Scriptures regarding his son, who as to his earthly life was a descendant of David, and who through the Spirit of holiness was appointed the Son of God in power by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. So a couple pieces we need to just kind of jump into right here. Paul as a servant could also be interpreted Paul as a slave to Jesus Christ. I say that because that is the terminology that was initially used. We translated it servant because the especially in the Americas, because of the way we redefine slavery in our culture. That's why that change is there. But he was a servant to Jesus Christ, called, right? Notice not appointed necessarily, but called. Could have chosen not to do it, chose to do it. Appointed means someone put you in the place and you had to do it. Called says that you heard it and you responded of your own free will. No one is forcing you. So Paul, a servant of Christ, forced by nobody to be an apostle, and has been set apart. He is different. He is different than those people you've heard before because he has a special anointing for the gospel of God, right? He's getting deep. This is Paul getting deep. He's trying to establish who he is right now. I need this. And I also need you to notice that he didn't address this to the church. If you didn't notice that, this letter is not addressed to the church. It's addressed to the saints, because the church wasn't that established in Rome at this time. This was an open letter to people. And in 2, he goes on, he says, the gospel he promised beforehand through his prophets. I'm a prophet. He's announcing the things he is. And then he clarifies why he is doing it. He says, regarding his son, Jesus, who as to his earthly life, he has a different set of lives. And the one that he lived on earth, he was a descendant of David. Anybody guess why he's making this known to the Romans? Any thoughts?
Did you say why? Say the question again, please.
Any thoughts on why David is showing this relationship between Jesus and David?
Why Paul is showing that relationship? Okay.
Why is he calling that out?
To kind of support the claim from the Old Testament.
Who is he talking to? Jews and Gentiles. The Jews aren't going to accept anything from somebody who doesn't recognize the Old Testament. If you can't talk about the Old Testament and the fulfillment of scriptures, close your mouth and move on. They don't want to hear from you. He knows that a good chunk of the believers in Rome have an Old Testament belief, and so he starts to address it. I need you to know the lineage of this Jesus is of David, and it was prophesied that David's lineage would rule the world, would save the world. And so he's making it real clear. And then he goes on in 4 and says, and who through the spirit of holiness. So now he's bringing up this spirit, right? He's saying he was appointed, he followed the Old Testament, and then now the Spirit came along, and by resurrection, he is complete in the fulfillment of the scriptures, and he is our Lord Jesus Christ. He is going there. He's establishing it early. Here's who he is. And then Romans 1:5-7 says, through him we receive grace and apostleship to call all Gentiles to the obedience that comes from faith for his name's sake. So I just fixed gave the Jews their fix. Now let me give the Gentiles their fix. Hey, Gentiles, you are included. You're included because of your obedience and following the law, or following what Jesus Christ has left behind for us to follow. And in 6, he says, and you also are among those Gentiles who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. To all in Rome who are loved by God and called to be his holy people, grace and peace to you from God, our Father, and from the Lord Jesus Christ. Salutations. He just hammered in 1-7 one of the greatest salutations in the history of the written language. Okay, he just addressed everybody. He's given them the salutation. So the first part of the opening is complete. The second part of the opening, I go the other way, starts in Romans 8, and he says first. And does anybody remember what the second part is? Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness how constantly I remember you. In my prayers at all times, this is one sentence, how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times. And I pray that now, at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. And now he's giving thanks. He gives thanks and then tells them, I am so thankful that I'm going to get to see you, that we're going to get to see each other, that we've never met before, but we soon shall be seeing each other. I'm moving. And then 11 through 13, he says, I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I've had among the other Gentiles. So in this portion, this is where he starts to talk about, give you some glimpses of where he's headed, okay? And he says that he wants to impart to you some spiritual gifts. Boy, that's powerful. Coming from a people, you got to remember this, many of the Romans who are Christians at this moment are probably Christians because they were at Pentecost. And they came back to Rome and started these churches that were not in buildings. They were in people's homes. Again, this is why he sent the letter to the saints and not the church. And so he says, I got more gifts. You've seen the gifts, those of you who were at Pentecost. And I'm going to give you some more. And it's going to make you strong. And then he says, but I don't want you to just think it's about me giving to you. You're going to give to me too. And it's going to be because I live off of the idea that you are growing strong in the word and we'll encourage each other through our faith. But he also wants them to know, I've been thinking about y'all a long time. You know, I'm going to get in trouble here too, so forgive me. But my dad, who I've never met, who will periodically call, he will always say to me, I really did plan to come see you. That's how he would start it all up, trying to get in, because he knew that would be a soft spot. Paul knows that this is a soft spot, that they know that they want him to want to have come there. So Paul tells them, now I'm not saying he's lying. He's not. He's telling the truth. They have been on his heart. This is where he wanted to go. Remember, God has told him he was going to go to Rome no matter what, right? So he's been waiting to go. But that's a soft spot for him, to be wanted. And so Paul is planted the seed that they want to be wanted. Pretty powerful. And then we get to the end of this, and then I'll close this up in just a few moments. It says in Romans 1:14, I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. I'm coming to preach to everybody. This word that we have goes to everybody. There's no longer a higher class. I'm coming to teach you about all of it. So if you're not prepared, get prepared, because here I come, here I come, here I come. And so there it is, the statement of fact. That is what he's coming to do. And then in 16 and 17, he closes it. He says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. Here's a man who's been in prison for 2 years. He says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. Here comes that salvation message. Remember, salvation, salvation, salvation. It's one of his themes. He says, who believes? First to the Jew. Oh, this is important. First to the Jew, then to the Gentile. Notice some reverence he pays to the Jew. He knows that those who are in charge are predominantly Jews, but he also knows that this message is for the Gentiles. And so he wants to make sure that both groups feel welcomed in his presence and accepting of him, so that when he comes in, he will have prepared a place that he is welcomed. because he's not been welcomed in quite a few places when he didn't do this. Then in 17, he says, for in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Boy, he's coming, and he says this whole piece that righteousness of God is revealed. That's an interesting point, because to be revealed means to be uncovered, to be moved from a place of obscurity into a place of light. It is revealed. If you couldn't see it, now you can see it. It's center stage. And so this gospel is about to be center stage. And this first to last is a reference to the Gentiles and the Jews. In an odd kind of way, he's saying, look, there's going to be some movement. Some things are going to change. The things that some of you have always thought are different than what I'm about to talk to you about in this entire letter. And he says, the righteous will live by faith, meaning you're going to see some stuff and you're going to have to live understanding the truth and what is righteous despite what you are seeing. Because you're going to have to live by the faith that God is all the time. And that's really where he takes this whole opening. So again, the opening is designed to help create a landing place for him when he comes to Rome, so that he can go over to Spain and preach this gospel. Okay, so that's what this setup is. And then moving forward, you'll get all this word. You'll get this great word about everything, right? This is the setup to the whole book of Romans. So what questions do you have or thoughts? Any at all? I don't have any. Then I'm going to ask Norman, would you pray us out?
Yeah, sure.